Venezuela was blindsided. In the still morning skies over the Caribbean, an unfamiliar silhouette appeared, sleek, unmanned, and unmistakably American. The MQ-25 Stingray, the U.S. Navy's newest stealth drone, had arrived. This wasn't a fighter jet screaming across the horizon. It was quieter, subtler. An aircraft designed not just to fight but to redefine warfare. For Caracas, the sight was nothing short of shocking. A drone capable of refueling fighter jets mid-air, extending the reach of U.S. aircraft carriers, was suddenly flying in its backyard. What unfolded next rattled Venezuela's military leadership, unsettled its allies, and sent ripples through global defense circles. This was no routine flight. This was a warning delivered on silent wings. Understand why this mattered so much. One must grasp what the MQ-25 represents. Unlike traditional drones, the Stingray is the world's first operational, carrier-based aerial refueling UAV. It can launch from U.S. aircraft carriers and extend the combat range of fighters like the F/A-18 Super Hornet and the F-35C stealth jet. Its stealth shaping and advanced sensors allow it to operate closer to hostile airspace than traditional tankers ever could. And its design hints at more than just refueling. Surveillance, electronic warfare, even strike missions. In military terms, this drone doesn't just support the map, it redraws it. For Venezuela, the implications were alarming. U.S. fighters could now loiter longer, strike deeper, and operate with endurance that Caracas could not counter. When the exercise began aboard a U.S. carrier group stationed in the Caribbean, the stage was set. On deck, the MQ-25 sat poised with folded wings, its silhouette unlike anything else in naval aviation. Sailors watched as its engine roared to life, taxiing across the deck before hooking into the catapult. Then, with a thunderous launch, the Stingray was airborne. High above the sea, the Stingray slipped into thin morning clouds. But this was no mere test flight. Soon, a pair of F/A-18 Super Hornets closed in, and history was made. The MQ-25 extended its refueling probe, linking midair with a Hornet. For Venezuelan radar operators along the coast, the meaning was clear. The United States had just erased distance as a barrier. American jets could now reach deep inside South America without ever touching down. Inside Caracas, alarms blared. Radar operators tracked the drone's faint signature, struggling to maintain a lock. Reports streamed into the Ministry of Defense. Unmanned aerial vehicle spotted. Refueling activity confirmed. State television scrambled to frame the incident as provocation. Fighter jets were ordered into the air, yet none dared approach the U.S. carrier group. For President Maduro's generals, the message was terrifying. If America could sustain air operations with drones, Venezuela's already thin defenses would crumble under pressure. And the exercise did not end with a single refueling. The Stingray continued, extending fuel to multiple Hornets over the course of the mission. From the ground, Venezuelan observers watched an aerial ballet, one drone sustaining an entire formation of fighters in the sky. This was not just efficiency, it was dominance. With carriers far offshore, U.S. jets could patrol near Venezuelan airspace for hours and strike deeper than ever before. To Washington, the operation was a demonstration, escalation on demand. To Caracas, it was a blunt reminder, your defenses can be outlasted. To Russia and Iran, who both maintained ties with Venezuela, it was a warning that their footholds in the Americas could be jeopardized. And to allies like Colombia, it was proof that U.S. power projection is only growing stronger. The Stingray was more than just a drone, it was a symbol. It proved the U.S. could push the endurance of its air power beyond any adversary's reach. Caracas condemned the test, calling it an unlawful intrusion into regional stability. Cuban state media echoed the outrage, denouncing the flight as a rehearsal for aggression. Nicaragua joined in, warning of Washington's tightening grip over Latin America. But elsewhere, the mood was different. Quietly in Bogotá and other allied capitals, the event was celebrated. What Venezuela witnessed was not just a machine in the sky. It was the arrival of a new era of warfare, one where endurance, reach, and stealth merge in ways few nations are prepared to counter. And for those watching the Caribbean skis that morning, the message could not have been clearer. The future of air dominance had just arrived. For Washington's allies in the region, the MQ-25 Stingray test was reassurance. With this drone, the U.S. Navy could protect them more effectively against Venezuelan or foreign-backed threats. But in Moscow, the mood was different. Russian analysts voiced alarm. Moscow had invested heavily in Venezuela through arms deals and advisors, and the Stingray's arrival suggested those systems could now be flanked from new angles. In Tehran, state media condemned the test as imperialist drone warfare. Behind the scenes, Iranian advisors in Caracas quietly studied the footage. Their question was simple but troubling. Could their air defense systems even detect such a machine in time? Both Russia and Iran understood the truth. This wasn't just a regional test flight. It was a strategic rehearsal. Experts quickly speculated on what would come next. More Stingrays across U.S. carrier groups, integrated operations with F-35 stealth jets, almost unlimited strike endurance. Some predicted electronic warfare upgrades, enabling Stingrays to jam enemy radars over Venezuela. Others foresaw persistent surveillance, drones circling the Caribbean skis and recording every move Caracas makes. For Venezuela, the picture was chilling. The MQ-25 represented an adversary that never tired, never hesitated, and could keep American fighters in the air indefinitely. The psychological impact was enormous. Imagine a radar operator staring at a faint blip, realizing it isn't a fighter, but a drone enabling endless U.S. air patrols. Sometimes the most frightening weapons are the ones that never fire a shot. President Maduro now faced a dilemma: ignore the test and risk appearing weak, or respond too aggressively and risk a confrontation he could not win. Caracas scrambled jets, activated Russian-made S-300 batteries, and delivered fiery speeches on state television. But the truth was obvious. Venezuela could not stop what it had just seen. By the end of the demonstration, one fact was undeniable. The United States had rewritten the rules of air power in the Caribbean. The Stingray's presence meant Venezuela's margin for survival had shrunk further. For Washington, the flight was not a stunt but the first move in a larger strategy. For Moscow and Tehran, it was a challenge. And for Caracas, it was a wake-up call. The most unsettling question remains: what if the next Stingray mission isn't just a test? The Caribbean is no longer a quiet stage. It is now the frontline of a new era of unmanned warfare, an escalation that is no longer hypothetical but inevitable. Maduro leaned heavily on Russia, China, and Iran after the MQ-25 Stingray test, calling it a violation of sovereignty. But the truth was clear: Venezuela could not stop the drone. All it could do was protest loudly and hope its allies responded. In Moscow, the test was a nightmare scenario. Russia had poured weapons, jets, and advisors into Venezuela, only to see the balance shift with a single U.S. drone flight. Analysts debated: send more air defenses and risk escalation, or stick to rhetoric and avoid direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy. Either option carried risk, and the Caribbean began to look like a replay of the Cold War, with Venezuela as the new Cuba. Iran, too, was unsettled. For years it had supplied Caracas with oil, drones, and asymmetric warfare training. But the Stingray exposed the gap. Whatever Tehran could provide, American technology was decades ahead. Iranian state media blasted the test as imperial aggression, yet privately its advisors admitted their drone doctrine couldn't match the Stingray's endurance and stealth. Across Latin America, reactions were mixed. Colombia welcomed the demonstration, calling it a guarantee of regional security. Cuba denounced it as intimidation. Caribbean states stayed publicly silent but privately supportive, reassured by U.S. power. The result was clear: the region was divided and Venezuela stood increasingly isolated. Think tanks outlined scenarios. The U.S. might apply controlled pressure, continuing drone flights to tighten psychological strain without firing a shot. A limited confrontation could erupt if a Venezuelan jet or radar crew overreacted. Full escalation, if Russia or Iran pushed too far, could mean fleets of Stingrays fueling stealth fighters, overwhelming Venezuela's defenses in hours. Inside the Pentagon, debate centered on the next step. Some argued the message had already been sent, Venezuela was on notice. Others urged continued flights, fearing that pulling back would embolden Caracas. The chosen path was flexible escalation, more Stingray patrols, combined with naval presence, but always with the option to scale down if tension spiked. For Venezuela, the Stingray was more than a machine. It was a psychological weapon. Soldiers saw proof that their defenses could be outlasted. Citizens whispered about war, fearing U.S. technology was unstoppable. Allies felt reassured. Rivals felt cornered. In modern warfare, perception is as powerful as firepower, and the MQ-25 had already tilted that perception heavily toward Washington. The Caribbean skis had changed. One test flight rewrote the rules of air power, and the world took notice.